What's going on? Welcome into another episode of Always Talking Ball. I am Tyler Noe. Lance Spartan is here as well. And we are going to get to a full week one recap. Week one is always interesting because there's 5 straight days of football. We're actually recording this Monday before the Florida State-Boston College game because we wanted to get it out to you by at least on Tuesday. And, we don't hardly remember that Colorado State barely squeaked by North Dakota State on Thursday night, but we're going to get to as much as we can. We may talk for hours today. We were just talking before the podcast, and we said, let's just hit the record button. Let's just start talking. So, again, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to like. Follow us on everything. We're just going to leave it at that. You guys already know what to do. You guys already know to share the podcast. We appreciate you guys doing that. Lance, let's get right into it. Probably no other place to start than where I was, a little over 24 hours ago. That's College Station, Texas. College game day, Saturday night, ABC. A&M goes in as 3-point favorites over the disrespected Notre Dame Fighting Irish, and Notre Dame showed them what's up.
Yeah, man, take a bow. Take a bow for the folks that are, if you're listening right now.
I wasn't bold enough to take them bet, but I had low expectations going into the game, but yeah, I will take a bow.
Well, hey, we knew this was going to happen because I did the thing. I did you dirty, man. You're my partner. You're my boy. You were going to the game. You're an Irish fan. And I right here looked you in the eyes on this screen, and I took Texas A&M minus 2.5 as one of my best bets. And yeah, I was wrong.
Didn't someone say like Tyler looks like he's about ready to like punch you through that screen? Right
yeah, they did. So I got what I deserved with that. And in all seriousness, though, man, what an effort by the Irish. When they were coming out of the tunnel, when they were showing that team coming out of the tunnel, and it showed Marcus Freeman just firing up the crowd, talking a little smack to the A&M fans, getting his team fired up coming out of the tunnel, you knew that Notre Dame was showing up for a fight. And they were ready for a 15-round toe-to-toe heavyweight battle, and that's pretty much what it turned into. And, dude, what's impressive about this Notre Dame team is we knew this defense was going to be really good.
Yeah, we said top 5 in the country at least.
Yes, top 5 in the country, and their defensive backs were top 5 in the country as well. They absolutely lived up to that. I put out on X the other day the biggest mismatches going into this weekend that two of them were Notre Dame's defensive line versus Texas A&M's offensive line. Also, Texas A&M's D-line versus Notre Dame's offensive line, which turned out not to be the case. But also Notre Dame's DBs versus the Texas A&M wide receivers. And that ended up being the biggest difference maker in this game. Texas A&M, I know everybody's kind of riding the A&M receivers right now, talking about how trash they are. And I don't know that they're that trash. I just think Notre Dame's DBs are that freaking good, man.
Yeah, the problem with A&M receivers is, like, I don't know any of their names. Like, if you don't know at least one wide receiver's name, like, that's an issue. And, like, you didn't hear him a lot on Saturday night either.
Yeah, I mean, and that was kind of a problem going into this game. That was what, Billy Lucci from Texags, he's been on different shows saying that one of the biggest question marks they have going into this was the wide receiver room. Interesting to see what that bunch was going to, how they were going to look. Man, that was, again, tough task to go up against Benjamin Morrison and Xavier Watts and that bunch from Notre Dame in that secondary. But, man, they lived up to it. They were blanketing those receivers all night long. And it didn't hurt either that Connor Wigman, man, dude looked like absolute booty. And I've been talking all off season about how I thought he could be just legit going into this year. And he looked like a guy that hasn't played since early to mid-September last year.
He did not look like the guy that just absolutely torched Miami last year.
Right. He did not look like the guy that threw for over 900 yards and 10 total touchdowns in 3.5 games he played in last year. But, dude, that was
12 for 30 for 100 yards.
Yeah, awful.
2 picks.
He was awful. He was.
I think I text you, had to be midway through the first quarter, maybe early second, that he was just wildly inaccurate.
Yeah, and he was. There were some guys that were open. He was missing them, and then other time it got to the point though that that Notre Dame D line was just whipping A&M up front. The run game for A&M couldn't really get going either. They had a little bit of success there, but Notre Dame pretty much just got to the point where they were matching up on the outside with the receivers one-on-one because they did not respect them at all.
Yeah.
And they could commit more to the box to be able to stop the run because they were leaving their DBs out on islands because their DBs were just so much better than A&M's receivers. And, I mean, to go in a hostile environment like that and to execute overall as much as they did offensively with a new offensive play caller, a new quarterback, new receivers, a young offensive line in that hostile of environment is just as impressive as it gets. Here's what's scary about this Notre Dame team. That's as bad as the offense will look all year. They're only going to improve with an OC like Denbrock and the athletes and the players that they actually do have now on the perimeter with a Riley Leonard at quarterback. Dude's a dog, by the way. I mean, he just unflappable, really. And just seems cool, calm, collected, takes care of it. I mean, you were saying before we were recording this stuff about how he, calls checks at the line of scrimmage. I mean, he's doing that kind of stuff, man. And that
he calls all the protections himself.
Right. He's doing all of that in that type of environment with a new team. This offense is only going to improve. And I'm decided I'm going to go on a little rant here, real quick about something. Everybody that listens to this knows I'm a Bama fan. I grew up in SEC country, and most of the people I grew up around always talked down upon Notre Dame, and usually the rest of the country does as well. Acts like that they're so overrated and they don't have athletes, and just kind of trash talks them. Dude, that is a tough, hard-nosed, good, well-coached football team, man. And they showed up in Texas A&M, and you said on the most recent episode, what if Notre Dame goes into College Station and pushes them around? And they did that in the second half. That young offensive line grew up in a hurry and did that in the second half. But the brand of football that Notre Dame plays, dude, they've been as consistent. If you actually took the time to go look at college football programs over the last decade and looked at
really since the playoff era, probably, and a couple of years before that.
Right.
Yeah.
And people just trash Notre Dame because they got in the playoffs and got their ass kicked by like Clemson or by Trevor Lawrence Clemson. Well, Alabama got trashed by that Trevor Lawrence Clemson team too, and nobody said anything else about that. Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley got thrashed by everybody they played in the playoffs, basically, except that one game against Georgia. Nobody talked about that the same way that they talked about Notre Dame. Notre Dame got spanked by Bama back in whatever that was, 2012. But again, Nick Saban and Bama spanked a lot of other teams too, and they didn't get them the same treatment. It's just look, if people want to hate Notre Dame because of they don't like the fact that they're not in a conference, or that people think that Notre Dame thinks that they're better than others or something like that, whatever. If that's what you want to think, so be it. But as far as the talent and the play on the field of this football team, that's a damn good football team there in South Bend. And you being a fan of them, congrats, dude. You're going to have a fun year this year. And that's not an overreaction. I don't, maybe somebody can clip this later on in the year and I'll look stupid, but I feel pretty confident in saying that this Notre Dame team is going to have a hell of a year as long as they stay healthy.
You need to stop saying clip this, because people are going to start clipping it
I know,
and come
man.
back at you. But
I know, we'll get to that in a minute on the Miami deal.
Yeah, they and I think about just, how old we are and kind of the social media era of 2010, 2011 is kind of when that started peaking. And that's when you start talking to people from all over the country, or reading what they're tweeting about Notre Dame not win the big ones, which, might have been a case of their previous coach, which we'll get to in a second. But yeah, the offensive line at the game was fantastic. Didn't allow any sacks. They allowed a couple pressures, but again, Riley Leonard, he's a dog. He was able to get out of those pressures. He had a play, I think, in the first quarter where he escaped the sack, and it was a running back wide open. He just couldn't get enough on it to him. That dude would still be running right now.
Yep.
And he just made plays. They did the power run, which was a asset of their game that they did not have last year with Sam Hartman. Obviously, he wasn't the runner. He could spin it, but he wasn't a runner. Riley Leonard could do both.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Elko on game day before had all the praise in the world for his former quarterback, saying, I don't understand why people don't call him a dual threat. They just talk about him being able to run and everything. Like, he can throw it. And he did. He completed 60% of his passes.
Dude, I'll say it live. I'll say it live right here. The reason they say it is because he's white. Seriously, they really is. Like they don't
Yeah.
they don't act like he's some major dual threat because he's white. I'm just being honest.
Yeah. And they finally got some receivers. Jordan Faison went out with an injury in the second quarter, but Bo Collins from Clemson looks like a solid transfer. He made a really nice catch there in the fourth quarter. Clemson could probably use him right now. Chris Mitchell had a couple nice plays. They were throwing some shots down the field, but again, hostile environment. They're not going to take too many shots. They know they have a good defense. They're going to get that stuff ironed out against Northern Illinois and Purdue and Miami of Ohio the next 3 weeks, right? So I thought, it was week one, and we'll talk about it later, but penalties were crazy. 11 penalties on Notre Dame. One of the common themes was just a bunch of top 10 teams just had a lot of penalties, but they're good enough to overcome that, especially in week one. So, but yeah, the A&M side, right. Props to the Aggie fans. I loved going to College Station. It was a cool place. The stadium is one of the best college stadiums I've ever been in. It was really loud. It was really loud, especially when A&M tied it up at 13. It was very loud. Sorry to the 3-Tech Pod boys. I know you guys are A&M guys, so you took that one on the chin. But you guys in A&M, you're a little weird. You got a little weird to you. You're a little cultish down there with your yells and your hissing at people and not letting the hats in the student union and saying howdy instead of hey and all that stuff. You got a little weirdness to you, but I respect it. That's kind of what College Station is built on.
They've got their traditions,
cool area,
man.
Aggie Park, yeah, it's cool. But man, that Notre Dame offensive line, I just can't stop talking enough about them. They've now got 11 career starts, and they went up against a heck of a D line.
Yes,
and Nick Scorton and Shamar Stewart, and they were getting pressure. But yeah, in the second half, dude, we talked about it before. It was hot there. It wasn't as hot as it was 2 weeks ago in Texas, but it was hot and it was muggy and it was sweltering. And Notre Dame just leaned on the Aggies in the second half.
Yeah,
you saw clips of Connor Wigman puking. Guys were cramping. Not one dude on Notre Dame was down on the ground cramping. They were well conditioned. They were ready for it. They knew they had their team ready. Like you said, Marcus Freeman in the tunnel, dude, he was getting fired up. And we were right down there by the tunnel. We could hear him, and it was loud, and it was just an awesome game to go to. It was fun to get the win.
Well, you just brought up Marcus Freeman. I want to ask you this. We've talked about how, when he brought in Denbrock, that every great coach in college football, like we saw Nick Saban do it with Lane Kiffin. We saw Kirby Smart do it with his OC that he brought in like the last couple of years before he went to the Ravens. And now we saw Marcus Freeman. He's done it now with bringing in Mike Denbrock. But also, dude, I felt like that if you're a Notre Dame fan, you had to love how aggressive he was in that game, like going forward on the 4th and shorts, trusting that young O-line, trusting his team. Now, they got stopped that one time, which, by the way, did not get stopped. That was a first down. That was strange, man. Why even have replay?
It's week one for the officials, too. Okay.
Yeah, why even have replay? But it seems like he has grown up more as a coach as well in this spot, coaching in a big game like this. Like, again, he went in with full confidence with his team and believed in his team and showed the belief in his team. And you could feel it through the screen, man, through the whole time. So, again, you as a Notre Dame fan, did you feel that way too while watching it live, that that he going for it like that, and it was a lot more aggressive than what you've normally seen from them?
Yeah, he knows too. And I think you might see that here in the first couple of weeks of the football season too, when we talk about the 12-team playoff with a lot of these contenders, and they're playing these big games like Texas, Michigan coming up here. Like, you can go for it, and if you miss it and you end up losing the game, like, that sucks. But again, you can afford a one loss now and still get in the playoff. So, I could talk about this game forever. Marcus Freeman now, 5-1-1, I think, as an underdog against a spread against like ranked teams or something. So there's really no better place to transition to than the previous Notre Dame head coach. We'll go out to Vegas. We'll talk about LSU, USC. We'll talk about Brian
24 Kelly. Hours for you, man. I just thought about that.
Yeah, I alluded to it. I alluded to it earlier about, Notre Dame for the past 15 years, they can't win the big ones. They can't win the ranked games, like whatever. Maybe it wasn't Notre Dame all along. Maybe it was the head coach. and the guy who is pounding his fist on the press conference table now, saying that it's just the same things year after year. He's 0-3 in season openers now, and LSU has lost 5 season openers in a row. And
Wild.
You know, Brian Kelly, I'm sure you saw the press conference, right? Yeah, and I mean, with him, like, because he wasn't Notre Dame, because he, faked the whole accent and everything, like some of that, a little bit felt like a little bit of an act to me. Like he was getting really angry in the press conference. I'm like, it just feels all actish with him sometimes, but whatever. The game.
We haven't talked about this yet. I felt the same way. I honestly felt like it was I didn't feel like that was genuine.
Yeah. It just nothing ever does feels genuine.
Okay, I'm glad.
And now LSU fans are
that too.
LSU fans are experiencing everything that Notre Dame fans warned them about. And that win over Alabama 2 years ago in double overtime against an Alabama team that had 2 losses and didn't go to the playoff, like the worst Alabama team in the last 5 years, right? I mean, that's propping him up enough to where they're not realizing your defense sucked last year. You had a Heisman Trophy winner and you only won 9 games. You've lost 3 openers in a row when you've been favored in 2 of them, I think. Maybe they were favored last year too, but you were favored in 2 of them. And he finally went out and he hired Blake Baker, defense coordinator. And I know both of these offenses for LSU and USC were taking a step back from Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams. And they were losing some receivers, especially on the LSU side. Both these defenses really looked improved from what I saw last night. And I know Blake Baker, we talked about him a lot. His defense looked good. Deanton Lynn's defense looked really good. And I think it was just a lot more training. And they said, it's a lot more laid back there at USC now on the defensive side of the ball.
Just schematically, we talked about this a lot, man. We said both of these defenses were ranked in like the 100s, and we said that if they could just improve a little bit, which by scheme alone they should, and they both definitely looked like that last night. They looked schematically just so much better overall. So yeah, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, USC ends up getting the win 27-20 with Woody Marks' touchdown with about 8 seconds to go. LSU ties it up with a field goal, about 150, 140 left. And Miller Moss just makes it look so easy. USC's got 1 timeout left. He's got Lincoln Riley in his back pocket, which is just not fair. It's the whole Breaking Bad, Jesse gif. He can't keep getting away with this. Lincoln Riley he's
so good.
Quarterback after quarterback.
Yeah, he's so good.
And Garrett Nussmeier looked good. He did. He looked good. Miller Moss looked better.
So they both look great. Both quarterbacks look great. Both receiving cores, the offenses in general, both look fantastic.
Yeah. And LSU, they drove down the first drive of the game, got stopped on the goal line. So that, took off some time. Obviously, that lowered the total for the game. And Moss was definitely better than Nuss last night. And Brian Kelly, again, mentioned that in his press conference, which, like he said, their quarterback was better than our quarterback. I'm like, for you to put that loss on Garrett Nussmeier, you should talk to Joe Sloan about his play calling. The drives that they did push the ball down the field to Kyron Lacey because he was doing whatever he wanted. They scored on those drives where they got down inside the 5 and got stopped. But then they started trying to, establish the run in the second half, which is just a Brian Kelly. That's what he does. He tries to establish a run and play good defense, and he's got an average defense right now. So, they got a 6-year guy, John Emery, who's had 85 injuries, and he's out there busting a couple, but they just
I think that was the definition, man, of you heard him even pregame talk about, with the Holly Rowe, we're going to lean on our offensive line. Our offensive line is how great they were, all of that. And I think it got to the point to where they could have gone 5 wide and just everybody get open. And Nussmeier and those receivers could have picked that defense apart.
Yeah, that O-line though, they were a little shaky in the run game too. They was similar to maybe Alabama last year, all their hype about their O-line and their tackles and everything, and then you get these 2 guys coming in, these tackles that are, projected NFL first rounders. They just didn't look like we thought they were going to look and like how everyone said they were going to look.
They were really good in pass blocking. They were not as good in the run blocking. And I think some of that too, USC was playing safeties really deep. trying to keep everything in front of them. They were giving LSU that 10 to 15 yard, like, when Nussmeier kept hitting Lacey, like you were talking about, they were giving them that. And like you said, for whatever reason, they wouldn't go back to it until towards the end of the game when they started doing it again.
Yeah.
There in the fourth quarter. Yeah, it was strange, but overall, that was about as well played as a football game. That was like a heavyweight fight there last night in Vegas. That was a great football game played by two really good football teams. USC, for all of the trash talk that a lot of people had to say, and I admit last year we were on USC pretty hard. I was actually proud of us that this was one of the things I felt like we got pretty right going into this year. We did not trash USC that much going into this year. And, we talked about how this was Lincoln Riley's team now, and Miller Moss and this offense would play within the Lincoln Riley offensive system, and they did exactly that last night. And, again, it's just unbelievable, dude, how Riley year after year Miller Moss is so freaking accurate, dude. So smart.
There was a while there in the first half where he was getting some pressure. He was misfiring a little bit, and I thought, man, he could be like a Matt Flynn type, like put up 6 touchdowns in a game that doesn't matter, and then get the starting job and not do anything. But then he turned it on there in the second half.
Yeah, he just looked really good overall.
Yeah.
But
one thing I noticed too on both defenses, but especially USC's, was just the tackling was noticeably better by both teams.
So much better. Yeah, they were getting people to the ground. Riley talked about it at halftime. When he was going off the field at halftime, they were asking, he was like, what do you think of your defense, whatever? And he said, we're tackling really well right now. That's the first thing he said. Yeah. And he's right. They tackled well all night long. Like you said, LSU did too. So I didn't really think anybody did anything like I'm watching the game, but something was just so bad or so off. It was more so to me, like you're talking about. I just feel like LSU, there were things to be had there in the downfield passing game, and they just wouldn't stay with it for whatever reason. But
they locked in on Kyron Lacey, they locked in on Mason Taylor, but they used Aaron Anderson a little bit. Yeah. They didn't hardly use CJ Daniels, a transfer from Liberty, a lot. He had a couple catches on the first drive, but again, you got to go back to Brian Kelly. And obviously it's best part of week 1 is Overreaction Monday. And LSU fans are done with him, right? He can't win a season opener, and they want to schedule easier season openers now. Well, fortunately for them, they go to Clemson week 1 next year. So yeah, that might be a little easier, as we'll get to here in a second with Georgia Clemson game. But someone said, is he on the hot seat? Like, no, he's probably not on the hot seat, but like, it is probably getting a little warm because they're not paying him $100 million to lose season openers and just win 9 games a year and not go to the playoff.
Yeah, I you know me, like the Overreaction Monday to week 1 is one of my favorite days of the year and it's palpable this year more than ever. The overreactions are through the roof right now. And this is one of them. That LSU team, I didn't walk away from this game thinking anything wrong with LSU at all. That's a really good football team and absolutely a big time playoff contender still, without a doubt. Mm-hmm. They could run the table. They're good enough to beat everybody on their schedule. They get Ole Miss at home. They get Alabama at home. That's probably their 2 biggest games on their schedule. I think they go to A&M and to the Swamp. Every game that I just said, there's a good chance they're going to be favored in all of those games. Maybe not Alabama.
Tiger Stadium still.
Right. Yeah, maybe not Alabama, but like there's still a good chance they could be a slight favorite at home in Tiger Stadium against Bama too. So, but this was more USC. This was more USC in my opinion. Mm-hmm. That if with Lincoln Riley and his offense, if that defense can continue to improve and stay relatively healthy, because I don't think they have a ton of depth on defense, but if they can play that type of defense, or maybe even just slightly worse still, the teams they're going to play against, some of those teams in the Big Ten have never had to deal with the athletes they're going to have to deal with on the perimeter and the scheme they're going to have to deal with Lincoln Riley. The USC can do some special things this year and make a playoff run, no doubt about it. They're squarely in that picture now.
Yeah, I mean, a couple weeks they go to Ann Arbor, they play Michigan, and then they get to host Penn State. We kind of just glossed over that game in the preseason, like, oh, Penn State's not going to lose that. Like, that looks a lot tougher now. Notre Dame
Yeah.
going to USC the final week of the season, like that looks that like to be Notre Dame's hardest game now.
That was the last question I was going to ask you before we moved on to Georgia Clemson was, as a Notre Dame fan, you can kind of start peeking a little bit to that last game of the year. There could be a
Well, I think we talked about it in the preseason where if Notre Dame beats A&M, it's going to be tough for them to lose 2 more games. And we talked about even still like a 10-2 Notre Dame team with a win in College Station, because we're assuming A&M is probably a good team still, would still get in. So like they're going to have to really, really try hard not to get in the playoff now.
Yeah.
So yeah, you look at that Florida State game at home and how they've looked. And according to Kelly Ford, that USC game is now like the lowest win percentage expectancy that Notre Dame has now.
Yeah, that what I was going to say with that game, last game of the year, could have a ton riding on it now for both of those teams. But it could especially be for USC. If USC is sitting there with only 2 losses, let's just say USC. Let's say they lose to Penn State and Michigan, hypothetically. That's their only 2 losses. And they go into that game against Notre Dame, last game of the year, where if they win that game, they're a great chance to be in the playoffs. That would be awesome for that
Big Ten championship game.
Right. That'd be awesome for that rivalry. That would be fantastic.
Yeah. It'd be fun too. I mean, if Notre Dame's undefeated going into that, trying to play for that 5 seed, which we've talked about as a good path for a lot of teams. But so one team that we are pretty sure is probably going to be in the playoff is Georgia, the undisputed number 1 team in the country, taking on Dabo Swinney and the Tigers. 34-3, I believe, was the final score here. I think it was 6-0 at halftime. And when I was down in Texas, we took off from Houston to go to College Station. So we were driving, weren't really following along. We actually followed along Vandy and VT a little bit over Georgia Clemson, because every time you looked, Georgia was scoring another touchdown. You watched the game more than I did. What did you take away from it? What was like main takeaways?
So in the first half, it was both teams' defensive lines were just nasty. They were dominating the game. Both teams' D lines on both sides of the ball. And Georgia just kind of seemed, when you watch Georgia play a lot, I mean, the intensity that they've got, that they play with, you didn't see it in the first half. They just were, they almost looked like they were almost going through the motions a little bit. And Clemson was playing with their hair on fire on defense. Georgia was still defensively Georgia. They're, what we thought they were on defense. And I remember I called my dad at halftime. We were talking about it, and I said, you're probably going to see a typical deal here where Kirby Smart's going to go in at halftime, and some of those legendary speeches that have leaked out before, him dropping 90 F-bombs and losing his mind at his team. I'm sure that happened because, dude, that was a bunch of sharks and blood-infested waters in that second half for Georgia. They came out firing on all cylinders. They turned Carson Beck loose and those receivers loose and let Beck cook, and he cooked. And then as if, we needed any more weapons to be, discovered for Georgia, true freshman Nate Frazier from Powerhouse Modern Day High School, the number 2 running back in the country. He looks like the next great one. So him and ETN together, when ETN comes back next week, are going to be incredible. But everything was firing in the second half on all cylinders. And Clemson looked like the defense a little bit, kind of gave out of gas a little bit. They were on the field a lot because Clemson, like we talked about this past week, Clemson just couldn't sustain drives. They couldn't stay on the field on offense and give their defense any rest at all. And I just think that wore and tore on this Clemson defense. And so this was the main thing I wanted to talk about today on Overreaction Monday. We said that this was going to be the biggest overreaction, and it was. The piling up, it's become like the cool and fun thing to do for everybody else that's not Clemson fans, just to pile up on Dabo Swinney and Clemson. And it's exactly what happened. That everybody is just all over Dabo because they got their butts kicked by Georgia. I want to remind everybody that 95% of the rest of the country would also gone into Atlanta this past Saturday and got their butts kicked by Kirby Smart in Georgia. And for all the people that want to talk about how, well, the transfer portal, look, I agree with that. I think Dabo should adapt a little bit. You can fill in a few pieces to do that. But for people saying that the reason why that Clemson got dominated by Georgia is because he doesn't commit to the transfer portal, the most portal-heavy team in all of college football, basically besides Colorado, of course, one of them is Ole Miss. Ole Miss got their cheeks clapped last year at Georgia in Athens, like destroyed. And that was a very portal-heavy football team that Ole Miss went on to win double-digit games and went and won a New Year's Six bowl game. And here's Clemson. In that game, everybody is leaving Clemson for dead. Everybody's acting like they are just a trash football team and Dabo can't coach. I want to see where you guys are at the end of the year when Clemson's sitting there with a chance to play for an ACC championship. Now, on the flip side of this, where I will say this now that we kind of already knew this, but it was beyond evident Saturday. Clemson has for sure completely fallen off from being among the elite in the sport. They don't belong on the same field with Georgia. And that is where they've fallen off. Clemson is still somewhere between that, 8 to 15 range of teams in college football. But they can't play with the very top tier of the sport anymore. And most teams can't. But Clemson could for a decade plus. And they definitely can't anymore. We kind of already knew that, but what we saw Saturday just made that even more evident. Because, dude, Cade Klubnik, that's where they've just – I know that everybody talks about the receivers too or whatever, but it's more so the quarterback position. When they had Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, they still had a lot of the same players around those guys that they do now. There's still some very talented receivers. Now, are they as good as some of the great ones were, like Sammy Watkins and Mike Williams and some of those guys? No. But they're still solid receivers. Maffa's a great tailback. They've got a solid offensive line. They've got a really good defense and really good coaching staff. They've just got a mid quarterback. And I don't know if Garrett Riley, is he the problem? Is Klubnik just flat out, that's what he is? He's mid? I don't know the answer. But I still think they're good enough to compete for an ACC championship and get to the playoffs.
I think the criticism is actually well-deserved for Dabo because if the quarterback's the most important position on the field, and when you just literally refuse to go to the portal and you see in your own locker room, we got Cade Klubnik and he's going to be just fine, and he's not, like, that's an issue. You have a tool at your disposal to go in and find a quarterback like a Riley Leonard or a Cam Ward or someone like that who's a difference maker for your team, and you choose not to do it. And he can say all he wants that Clemson can't afford, some of those guys and whatever, but like that's I think that's BS. And I think that one of the issues is where you're saying like 95% of the teams would get, absolutely killed by Georgia. Like that's the issue. And especially with Clemson fans, is because where they've been for the last decade and winning a couple of national championships, that should be a huge problem in Clemson. And you should be on the field with teams like that, and those should be good games. And I know Georgia's just another level. And Saturday morning I was in the airport and I'm thinking more and more about this game, and I'm like, there's just no way that Kirby Smart has this much time to prepare for a team, and it's a big game, and he's not going to go absolutely just ham and go crazy on them, and just he does that to everybody except for Nick Saban. And so, it's just that's what he does. Like you said, Ole Miss, that's what he does, and he did it to Tennessee last year. So it's just all these teams that are in that tier and their big games, he finds a way to get it done. Do you think it matters at all that Georgia, obviously we don't have Trevor Etienne back, but does it matter at all that they don't have really someone who can, I don't feel like they have a skill position player who can really break the game wide open?
No, but
they're just really consistent and steady.
No, I don't think it matters because I think they've got 5 that are all really good. There were, I think, 5 or 6 guys catching passes that were just impressive as could be. Like you said, they don't have like a Kyron Lacey at LSU type guy that's just like you said that can take over the game and have 15 catches for or Tedero McMillan, who had over 300 yards receiving in Arizona. Like, they don't have a guy like that, but they've got 5 solid as a rock that can, and multiple tight ends, 4 or 5 wide receivers, 2 or 3 really good tailbacks, and arguably the best quarterback in the country with a really good offensive line. So I mean, I think it's almost a good thing for Georgia that they don't have, because I think they got to a point last year where they relied so much on Brock Bowers at times. Now, I'm not trying to say that they're just so much better without Brock Bowers. That's not what I'm saying. But there gets to a point where you rely so heavily on that one guy that if you do find a team that can kind of neutralize him, like kind of Bama did in that game in the SEC championship game last year, that you haven't utilized all the other weapons that are around. And so, I mean, Beck was just, it seemed like a different cat was catching the rock on every play. It was,
which we'll find out about Georgia. I mean, they got a really tough road slate this year, obviously, Bama, Texas, and Ole Miss. So, like, those teams have the players and the defensive coordinators and all that to devise a scheme to lock down some of those guys.
Yeah, and sometimes, man, too, in Georgia on defense, it seems like they had 15 guys on the field at times, like just swarming and stuff. So they looked the part like we thought they would, and that was an absolute mismatch. It's back to the drawing board for Clemson. I think they got like Appy State maybe next, which is no easy task. Yeah, no easy task. But it's also one of those deals. That's a tough spot for Appy State to go into, because I'm sure Clemson's going to be fired up for that one. But speaking of,
how about I was going to say we got an early favorite for the Heisman Trophy, not a preseason favorite. We got a Week 1 favorite. Yeah. And he wears a U on his helmet, and he plays quarterback for the Miami Hurricanes, and that's Cam Ward, because he went into Gainesville in a place that he criticized their fans after the game. He said, y'all got to get loud while we're in the huddle, not just when we break it. By then we've already got the play. We're good. He said Washington was louder than the Swamp. He said Oregon was louder than the Swamp. He said Pac-12 didn't get it to do, man. And Pate was there. Pate was talking about it too. It wasn't like it was, and that had a lot to do with Miami taking the crowd out of the game early, but he wasn't scared of the Swamp at all like we thought he would be. Florida is not the team that we thought they would be. They're not the team Billy Napier thought they would be. They're not the defense that Austin Armstrong thought they would be. Lot to unpack in this game.
Yeah, so, I mean, I really can't remember a time. I'm trying to remember, and I really don't. I was actually thinking about this. Yeah, I really can't remember a time where a team that was hyped up as far as the roster that we knew this Miami team had going into this year that looked the part and more. Dude, they early on, really early, I mean, Miami looked like an NFL team compared to Florida. Just the way they looked, in pads, the type of players on that team. Offensive line, defensive line, receivers, DBs, linebackers, everything. They were faster, bigger, stronger. They had that Miami swagger back. I mean, they showed up with rude intentions. And I looked at my wife at one time and I said, they need to get the women and the children out of the Swamp quick. I said, because this bunch ain't fooling around. And it was, like you said, the crowd, I think, dude, I could feel it through the TV. You knew so fast that, this Miami bunch is different. And they looked every bit of the part. And I'm not trying to overreact. They could go on and do the stupid things that we've seen the Mario Cristobal teams do before and all that. They still could do that. But I'm going to not talk about that at all right now and only give props to them because of how dominant they really did look and how good they really looked on the field as far as the players they've got on this roster. If they can stay healthy, there's not much of a back seat that they need to take to anyone. Literally anyone. Their O-line and their D-line and that wide receiver room and that skill position group and Cam Ward, they all can match up with anybody that you put across from them. It's just a matter of can they stay consistent and do it, because that was as big of a mismatch between two proud programs with good athletes. Like Florida's got a good roster. We've talked about that. They do have a good roster. But that was just golly, dude. That was such a mismatch. And that was not a fluke at all. If those two teams played 10 more times, I think Miami would spank them just like that over and over again as long as they just play well. And that's exactly how it was. I mean, there's really not much to it. I mean, Florida couldn't block them. I mean, Miami was pushing them around. And I know people are talking about, well, Miami didn't run the ball that well. If you watch Cam Ward play in that game, there's no reason for them to try to run the ball that much.
Yeah.
He could do whatever he wanted to against them. And those receivers were abusing the Florida DBs. And other than the Montrell Johnson, like, really long touchdown run that they had early in that game was even uglier than what the score said. Like, it was awful. So much so that I caught myself sitting there watching some other blowout somewhere else because I said, this is just like, I had it on a secondary TV kind of there in the second half because it was so bad.
Touching on, like, the crowd not being that loud and everything. It's pretty clear Napier has lost the fans. It's week 1. And I don't know if there's any coming back from this, and he's got A&M coming in 2 weeks, and with the way Connor Wigman and their offense look, if they come in and they beat Miami, like, that might be all she wrote for Billy Napier.
Yeah, I'm trying my best not to overreact. I'm gonna mention that again, but I just don't know the way they lost that game, the way they looked in comparison, because of they looked like such an inferior program compared to Miami. Like, I think, is this Cristobal's third year with Miami?
Yeah.
And this is Napier's third, right?
Yep.
I mean, look at the difference between those rosters. The way they looked, the way they played.
Again, it's just going back to Dabo in the portal. Mario Cristobal has utilized the portal extremely well.
Yeah.
And this is what he gets in return. And he knows he knew his team last year. They went 7-5. They had deficiencies at certain areas, and he went and he filled them. And sure, Miami may have more money than Clemson.
And he's hired 2 really good coordinators.
Yeah.
Too. Like, he's got 2 really good coordinators. So the sky's the limit with this team. It really is. Like, when you look at that team after that game, what's their weakness? We said their biggest weakness going into the game, where's their DBs? That still may end up, I guess, being the case. But even them, bro, they looked the part too. I mean, they tackle well. They were in coverage, like covering really well downfield. They're easily, after, I know it's only 1 week, they're easily the ACC, the class of the ACC right now. And I had them in the playoffs as the 11 seed. And I mean, you look at their schedule, they're going to be favored in every game. There's not a game on their schedule they won't be favored in. I mean, as long as Cam Ward can stay healthy, he'll probably have some games. He'll have a few turnovers or whatever, because he does improvise a lot and drop down, throw sidearm, running to his left or whatever. But he also makes a spectacular play. But as good as that defense is now too, as good as they are up front on the D-line overall, I think he can manage to do a little bit of that, because I think the defense can help bail him out some.
Yep.
So, but I mean, that was impressive. That was as dominant. I was trying to think back again. I said the 2019 LSU bunch, but no, I mean, that team in that first game of the year at Texas that year, I mean, they almost lost that game at Texas. The LSU offense was what everybody was talking about after that game.
Yeah.
But as far as a complete performance of one team, hyped up going into a year as far as so-and-so is back, I don't remember a team coming out and being that emphatically back in week 1 in a long time.
Yeah. All right, let's hit up our top 12 for the week. After week 1, Florida State did not make the cut, and so they're playing tonight's game, and whatever they do to BC, not going to make a difference, because you lost in week 0 to Georgia Tech. And they were in our, I think, did they make our, no, they were like 13th, so they didn't make it last year. So we looked smart last week. So we didn't have them in our top 12. We had the exact same top 4 teams, so which are number 1 Georgia. That's pretty easy. I'm glad we put them at number 1 to start the year, because we look really smart. Number 2, Ohio State. They get a 52-6 win over Akron. We bumped, both of you and I bumped up Alabama to number 3, with a 63 win
I had
over
them
TJ
I had them
Finley.
number 3 already.
You had him number 3. We bumped up the consensus number 3. 63 nothing win over Western Kentucky and their old rival nemesis TJ Finley. And then we dropped Oregon back one spot because they played a 10-point game against FCS Idaho, and I didn't catch any of that. I don't know if anybody really caught any of that. I'm choosing to believe that Dan Lanning just didn't want to show anything, and you looked at it a little bit like it was kind of.
I caught a little bit of it, man, and when I dove into it afterwards too, what the parts that I did catch is what I saw, and what I dove into afterwards is that they went up and down the field. They just could not finish drives.
Yeah, and it was Gabriel finished, or he finished with 49 attempts,
40 for
passing.
49.
Yeah, with 380 yards. So it was a lot of dink and dunk passes, looked like, and
They didn't run the ball. They didn't run the ball very well. They turned it over on downs. They had 4th and short.
Which is exactly what Dan Lanning wanted out of this game. He wanted them to have a 10-point win over a 40-point, favorite, and going in to play Boise State next week, coming into Autzen, and then they're obviously going to have, the Big Ten schedule hitting up, but it's exactly what he wanted.
I agree 1,000%, man. Agree 1,000%. He can take a lot of this, and they can, because again, they were definitely feeling themselves a little bit. Of all the hype going into it. I mean, heck, Herb Street and Saban in week 0 picked him to win the national championship on game day. So no, I'm with you on that.
Yeah, but you can't beat Idaho by 10 and not expect to drop back in the ATB top 12.
Agreed.
So they're number 4. We kept Texas at number 5 and Ole Miss at number 6. I kept them there. You kept Ole Miss at 5 and Texas at 6. They didn't really. I mean, Ole Miss played Furman. They beat them 76-0 or whatever it was. Texas played an actual, team, Mountain West team, and Colorado State, which has a pretty solid wide receiver who's going to be an NFL player and decent quarterback, and shut them out. So I thought that was pretty impressive.
I was going to say the defense of Texas. What you just said. I just also what you just said. Yeah, that's what impressed me.
We kept on our consensus poll Notre Dame at 7 and Penn State at 8, which is where I had them, and you kept Penn State ahead of Notre Dame, so you must have thought going into Morgantown and winning was better than going into a ranked College Station and beating Texas A&M.
I just didn't see anything that would make me want to drop Penn State. I thought that if those two teams matched up this week, it'd be a war. Penn State, Notre Dame. It'd be a great football game.
Yeah. Penn State, we'll talk a little bit about them in a second, but heck of a win over West Virginia, 34-12. Nick Singleton, Katron Allen, Drew Aller actually threw the ball. Andy Kotelnicki called a great game. They were all everything they cracked up to be, and McAfee tried his best on Friday to get that crowd all lathered up and liquored up and get them going for Saturday, and just didn't work. So consensus number 9, we didn't have them ranked at all, but you just talked about them, how great they looked in the swamp, and that's Miami. I had them at number 9. You had them at number 10. So they come in at number 9 on our consensus poll, right in front of the number 10 team, which is the Utah Utes, which I had at number 10. You had at 11. They came out with a 49-0 win over Southern Utah. Cam Rising tossed the rock, 15 times, 5 touchdowns. Brent Keithy had 3 touchdowns. Our boy is back.
God, he looks so back too, man. He looks so good out there slinging the rock around.
He should look back. He's like 27 years old.
Yeah, so. Man, I just love seeing him out there in that Utes uni, man, out there slinging the rock again. That was awesome to see him back.
Yep. Number 11 is the Tennessee Vols, which I believe they won 69-3 over some team in Tennessee.
Nico Iamaleava.
Yeah.
Dude. You want to talk about looking the part. You want to talk about looking the part. That's a scary football team. That's not overreacting. They've got a big one this week against NC State. I know everybody's kind of down on NC State because they played a tough game against Western Carolina. Same thing with the Oregon deal we talked about a minute ago. Dave Duran now has a lot to work on with that NC State team, in the bye week. But Tennessee definitely looked the part week 1. That's because you know how good Josh Heupel's offenses are already, and now he's got a big-time trigger man, and he looked every bit of the part.
Yep. And then coming in number 12 for us, I had him at 12. You had him at 13. It's the Michigan Wolverines and that vaunted offense they're running there in Ann Arbor. It looks really good against the Fresno State team. Missing Jeff Tedford. Mikey Keene, I know he's still quarterback there. Michigan defense still looking good. Will Johnson with a pick 6. But yeah, 30-10 win. So they didn't cover. I wish I would have taken that Fresno State plus 21.5. That would have been nice. But just missing the cut for us. A couple teams like USC. Obviously, they look good against LSU. Mizzou looked good on Thursday night against Murray State. I had Oklahoma State up there. I mean, solid win over South Dakota State after what we saw, Colorado do against North Dakota State. So yeah, just a couple teams on the outside looking in there. But let's move on to everybody's favorite segment. Oh, guess the spread for Lance Barton. This is where Lance guesses the spread on next week's upcoming game. So we're going to give you a little early lines. If you like them, take them. Lance, we're going to see where he's at, see what he thinks the spread should be, and that will give him a little idea of what he should do next weekend to redeem ourselves here on ATB. So let's just start with the big one, man. Big noon kickoff. Texas at Michigan. We saw both teams last week. What do you think the spread is?
I bet it's a little inflated now, honestly, after Texas. I think it should be probably 4.5, but I bet you it's a touchdown after
6.5.
6.5. Okay, it's
Yep.
right, close. It's close.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kansas State at Tulane.
Ooh. K-State. Somewhere in the 11 to 13 range.
K-State minus 10.
10. Okay.
A lot of respect down there for the Green Wave. How about this one? Arkansas at Oklahoma State. Arkansas coming off a 77-0, right? 77-0 win over Arkansas Pine Bluff, and I think they knocked it down to 10-minute quarters in the second half and running clock or something.
Yeah, I know that game was against Arkansas Pine Bluff, but still, Taylor Green looked pretty solid underneath Bobby Petrino. He got a good athlete there at QB. All right, so
Okie State, I mean, 44-20 over South Dakota State.
Yeah, that's an impressive win.
All they want.
That's an impressive win. Yeah, South Dakota State's a lot better than a lot of the bottom-tiered Division I teams, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So that's a solid W there. And Alan Bowman threw the ball well in that game as well. Ollie Gordon did his thing. All right, so line-wise, I'll say Oak State 4.5.
Oak State minus 8.
Oh, okay. The Pokes 8. Man, I was way off on both of their games so far. But I think I said they were whatever, and you told me they were only like 8 or 9.
Yeah, 9.5 against South Dakota.
Yeah. So
Yep.
Okay. So what? Wait, say that again. Now they're what now over Arkansas?
Minus 8.
Ooh. Okay.
Yeah,
that's interesting because I think I think that's going to be a war.
Yeah,
I think
again,
it's gonna
this
be a good
is
football game.
as of Monday afternoon, Labor Day, about 4 p.m. This is what the line is. So next game, little SEC tilt here. South Carolina at Kentucky. South Carolina struggles to the buzzer with Old Dominion.
Yeah.
And Kentucky, I think the game got delayed quite a bit with storms and whatnot, but I think they came out with the W against Southern Miss.
It's at Kentucky, right?
Yep.
Oh, man. Kentucky 8, 7.5, 8.
Kentucky minus 10.
Double digits.
As of Monday afternoon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
How about a little G5 love here? This was a game I touched on in the preseason when I was on CFB Focus with Mike Waxman. It could play a big pivotal role in the G5 spot in the playoff, and that is UTSA at Texas State.
Ooh, that's this week.
Jeff Traylor.
That's this next week. Okay.
Yes, Jeff Traylor against G.J. Kinney.
It's at Texas State.
At Texas State.
Texas State. I have no idea. I would say 3.5.
Texas State minus 2.5.
2.5
under the field goal. Yep.
So basically,
so that should be a good game if you're watching. Got multiple TVs in your basement. Week 2 seems a little bit lower on some of the marquee matchups, and that might be a really fun one to watch.
Yeah.
One I'm interested in is Georgia Tech at Syracuse.
That is a good matchup. Like everybody talks about sneaky good matchups each week.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be a good football game.
Yep.
Kyle McCord looked good, man. Week 1 for the Qs. Your boy Fran Brown after the game, did you hear his quote too?
Yeah, he's going to send a bottle of champagne to Ryan Day.
Yeah, appreciate you. And again, think about that though. They got a starter from Ohio State at Syracuse. right now. It's wild, man.
Yeah.
Ooh. So it's Georgia Tech at Syracuse.
Yep.
Georgia Tech. Oh. Georgia Tech favored by 3.5.
Georgia Tech's favored by 3.
Okay.
I didn't think you'd get that one. I thought you'd say Syracuse, but love for
No,
the
I mean,
Jackets.
I really, we talked about the Georgia Tech, though, a little bit before the year, like, how they looked last year against some of the better teams they played. That was not really a fluke, and how well they played against Florida State. They backed that up with coming back home in a trap spot, took care of business. Syracuse they took care of it. They won the game against Ohio or whatever, but I thought they'd look a little bit better against Ohio U overall. Defensively, there was a little bit of some breakdowns there, but that's going to be a really good football game up at Q's this Saturday. That's another one. If you multiple TVs, whatever you've got going on, that could be a fun one.
Tough to win in the Dome up there.
Yep.
All right, Cy-Hawk Trophy, Iowa State at Iowa this year.
At Iowa, Hawkeyes 3.5.
2.5.
Okay.
Right under that field goal, under that key number there.
Ooh. Okay.
Hawkeyes have owned them. I think they won at least 4 out of the last 5.
I'm going to say, so it's under a field goal. That's odds makers trying to tell you.
I think the total in that game last I saw was 36.5.
Yeah. Odds. Hey, but what? Hey. Hawkeyes, though, brought out a little offense this past weekend.
Yeah, they did.
Little Cade McNamara, Rocco Beck. We might see some points in that one. Come on now.
Yeah. Let's go down to the Plains where Cal is traveling to face Auburn, the old ACC versus SEC matchup here.
Ooh.
Auburn just absolutely obliterated Alabama A&M.
Dude, I got a stat for you. Auburn last year, I think I saw something like receivers last year caught a total of 7 touchdowns in the entire season. Wide receivers last year. That's not a typo. 6 wide receivers. No, wide receivers caught, not 6 wide receivers, 6 touchdowns caught by wide receivers in the first game of the year this year. It's just we've harped on it in the offseason. Yeah. This receiver room is different at Auburn this year. It just is.
Yeah.
So
Cal at Auburn.
Cal at Auburn. Man, couple tutties? 14 and a half?
14.
14?
Yeah, 14.
Okay.
Yep. I think they got a chance to really just beat the brakes off of Cal.
They could.
I really do.
They could. They could.
All right. A couple primetime matchups to finish us off. This one, I believe, is in Nashville or Charlotte, one of the two. It's Tennessee versus NC State. Yeah, Charlotte. So Tennessee versus NC State.
This is another one that probably got inflated over overreactions. Probably about the same as Texas, Michigan. Like I said, I thought it would be Tennessee, probably 4.5. I bet you they've inflated it. What's Tennessee? Touchdown?
Minus 7.5.
7.5? Yeah.
Yep, just over that touchdown.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure like a couple weeks ago it was like 4.5. Now it's jumped up that high. Okay.
Yep. And then to finish us off, 7:30 NBC, renewal of an old rivalry. They met last year. Dion, Coach Prime, Colorado, going to Nebraska, where Dylan Raiola, even against UTEP, looked the part.
This is going to be a fun one, man. Night games in Lincoln. If you want to check out a great atmosphere and see what a proud fan base and all that, that's going to be fun. Is Nebraska probably around a touchdown?
Minus 7.
They're right at 7.
Yep.
Okay.
It was 5, I think, yesterday or like a day and a half ago.
Hey, I did pretty good there on a few. I was a little off on a couple, but we dialed it in there at the end. Okay.
Yep. All right, let's finish this off with let's talk about, again, we talked about week 1 overreactions. We're going to touch on some teams here, almost like a lightning round style.
Yeah.
Where, we might have been right, we might have been wrong on a couple things. We're going to start with your second team there in Blacksburg, the Virginia Tech Hokies. They took on Vandy. Yeah, you might as well just toss that helmet to the side or something. But a lot of tears on that helmet right now. But they went to Vandy, and they faced the giant killer himself, Diego Pavia, and Jerry Kill, and basically the whole New Mexico State squad that transferred to Vandy there. But yeah, went into an SEC country. It's hard to come out with a win no matter who you play. And they were 13.5-point favorites. and we both took them over 8.5, expecting that one to be at least a win. We didn't know if they're going to cover, but you're at least going to be able to beat Vandy.
Yeah.
And it's, now they got one loss on their schedule, and it's going to be a little more dicey now for them to get that over that 8.5.
Yeah, like I told you, I think VT may be actually more back than ever. We saw the VT teams in the past that were so good, they would always look. Like a lot of friends that text me this year, well, dude, are the Hokies really back this year? Are they going to be back? The bigger games are not the ones I'm worried about. It's the games versus in the past where they would lose to East Carolina, or where they were ranked really high and lost to Boise. I know it was a good Boise team, but Old Dominion lost to Old Dominion, a couple years ago. They lose stupid games like this all the time. And I think that was going to happen this week? No. Did not think that Virginia Tech should have been favored by 2 touchdowns on the road. They shouldn't be favored by 2 touchdowns on the road against me and you and 9 others. They have not earned that respect yet. But, in reality, Diego Pavia played his butt off and played a great football game. And Vandy, I know it's Vandy, but Vandy looked like a middle tier type ACC team is how they played. Yeah. And that might be what Virginia Tech is. That might be the reality of what they are. I don't know yet. But because I am so close to this Virginia Tech program, being a fan and having family from that area and watching just about every single game that they play, no matter who they play, I've got a pretty good feeling of this football team. It still will not shock me at all if they end up going 10-2. It wouldn't shock me if they go. I still think they're somewhere between an 8-4 and 10-2 football team. I've not changed my mind on that. That's just a shame that with all of the momentum that you had built up going into this year and the excitement that you had, they had the majority of the fans in that stadium too, which I know most teams do when they go play Vandy in Nashville, that you managed to lose that game. And they didn't lose that game at the end. They didn't lose that game when Kyron Drones went down with cramps and stuff like that at the end of that game. They lost that game in the first half where they showed up half asleep and finally decided to start playing football there in the second half. But it's back to the drawing board. Won't be surprising at all to see Virginia Tech just beat the brakes off whoever they get in Blacksburg this coming up week after this game. Yeah. But yeah, I still don't feel any different than I really do about Virginia Tech. I know a lot of people have already seen it on Twitter. They're way off this bandwagon, whatever. That's fine, as you will. But I still think this is a somewhere between an 8 to 9, 10, somewhere around there win football team.
Yeah. Speaking of win totals, is our Florida over 4.5 just a dead loser already?
Yes. I don't feel like that's an overreaction either. And if the only thing that I will have a saving grace to, again, man, as far as looking the part, Miami might be that good. Mm-hmm. They might be we were talking about. Well, if Florida can't beat Miami in the swamp, they're not going to be able to beat some of these other teams. Miami might be a lot better than a lot of the teams on Florida's schedule in the SEC.
If Miami is looking like the part and they're looking like how we think they're going to look the rest of the season, and they end up winning the ACC, and if they look like that and they win the ACC, there's a chance, depending on the SEC and Big Ten championship games, that ACC is not going to be just a given 3rd seed. If Miami is really, really good, they could be the 2 seed or the 1 seed in the rankings too. So, and again, if they are the 3rd seed and they look down upon the ACC, there's going to be a fight for that 5th seed because you don't want to be the 6th seed having to beat the 11, which is a non-G5 team, and then having to go play Miami.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Agree 100%.
Oregon. What are you taking from it? Like I said, I don't believe Lanning showed anything at all. Again, 380 yards on 49 attempts. They look like they ran the ball well.
Do they have 30 something first downs? Idaho only had 10 first downs. They had multiple drives where they got stopped on, for which again, this is something to go to the drawing board of. 4th and 1 multiple times. They got stuffed. They missed a field goal. They went up and down the field, just couldn't finish drives. I don't take anything negative away from that at all. I still think this Oregon team is who we thought they were, which is they are a Big Ten title contender and they're a semifinal, possibly title contender. I don't think anything different of them.
What do you take away from Michigan? I take away that their offense stinks. They rolled with Davis Warren for the starting job. And for a while there, it was just ugly. Donovan Edwards can only do so much. He didn't even lead the team in rushing. Again, it's another team where you don't know a lot of the skill players, especially the wideouts. You don't know their names, and to me that's an issue. And they did it last year. They had JJ McCarthy, and they had Blake Corum, and they had Roman Wilson. They had all these guys that you actually knew, and they were really good. And the offensive line was really good. It's going to be tough for them this year if they don't figure out the offense.
Yeah, so I think there's some pretty significant, very similar, parallels here between Texas last year, week 2, went to Alabama and played an Alabama team that was really trying to find an identity on offense and trying to figure out who their quarterback was going to be. And they caught Alabama, and they did. It's just reality. They caught Alabama at a great time, and they went into Tuscaloosa and kicked their butt. And I think this is a very eerily similar situation. We've got a Michigan team that is trying to find their identity on offense. They're trying to find out who their quarterback is. They're going into a hostile environment in a tough place to play with a really good defense. And Michigan, Texas may go into the big house and kick Michigan's butt. They might do it. Here's the difference, though. Jalen Milroe, we saw how he improved throughout the year last year and what he turned out to be. And I think he finished 6th in the Heisman vote, race or whatever, and ended up becoming a really good quarterback for Alabama. I may eat these words, but dude, I don't think that Michigan has that on this roster. I don't. I don't think Alex Orger, Davis Warren, whoever can do that. I think that this is who they are. They're going to be in a lot of close games this year because their defense is legit. It's real. It's everything that we thought it was going to be. This defense is real. And they've got good running backs. Their offensive line's still going to be good enough that they're going to be able to run the football and they're going to be able to keep teams out of the end zone. But they've got problems at quarterback that I just don't think they can fix it. And they still, because of how good this coaching staff is and because how good the defense is, they might be able to go 9. They might be able to go 9-3, 10-2. But you could see them going 7-5, 8-4.
Yeah,
you could because they're going to have trouble scoring. They just are. If you don't have a quarterback that can, make plays for you, and they don't. This is just totally random, but I don't think I've seen a coach that looks more like he should be coaching for a team than Wink Martindale looks like for Michigan. They show that guy on the sidelines with the biggest sunglasses tan I've ever seen in my life. He just looks like the get off my lawn guy sitting there.
He was just fishing the day before, probably.
Yeah, dude. The way he looks on the sidelines, he looks he's where he needs to be, man. He needs to be coaching Michigan's defense for the rest of his life. Yeah, that's exactly what he looks like on the sidelines. I just wanted to say.
Speaking of parallels, any parallels between 2023 Michigan and 2024 Notre Dame? A lot of people are kind of the first one they talk about is their schedule. Because Michigan's schedule, we dogged on it all year last year. That's already what people are going to this year for Notre Dame is, the schedule. It's weak, which, it is weak for Notre Dame standards. Strong defense. Again, an offense is finding itself out. A mobile quarterback,
There are some parallels there, yes. I just don't know if Notre Dame has as many of the difference makers on Michigan. The biggest difference is I know the young O-line played well, but I can't say that they're anywhere near Michigan's O-line was so dominant last year. But but as far as staying in the Big Ten, we tried to tell you guys, and I definitely tried to tell you. I think I said the name Andy Kotelnicki 1,000 times this offseason. Like I said, I definitely got some things.
This is where we were right.
I was going to say I got some things wrong. Going into the year. But we also did get some things right. And, of course, most people only want to concentrate on what you got wrong. And they don't give you any little pat on the butt for what you get right. And Andy Kotelnicki is a dude as a play caller. And you saw it right out of the gate. And I think Penn State in the first half was averaging around 20-something yards per completion. They had 8 completions for 199 yards. I ain't gonna sit here and do the math right here in front of me, but that's what that is. Yeah. And so they brought him in because they wanted to get more explosive plays. But also Nicky, everywhere he's been, has had really good running games. And you saw both of those things in this game. Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, and that Penn State offense could run the rock, and Drew Aller looked like a 5-star quarterback in this game. And on the flip side of that, West Virginia now, in the last 2 years, have played 4 ranked teams. They've played 4 ranked teams. They've lost those games by an average of 24.5 points per game, and they've given up an average of 48 points per game in those 4 games. West Virginia is a solid little football team, guys, but they do not belong on the field with the upper echelon better football teams. They just don't. I think that was the definition, man, of like the people, like neither one of us had them, had West Virginia plus the points in this game. But the people that got on board with that, I think that was the definition of trying to find that trendy, fun underdog to get behind or whatever. I mean, West Virginia runs the football well. What does Penn State do on defense? You're not going to be able to run the football on them. And defensively, West Virginia just can't stand up against the better offenses. They just can't. Yeah. But Penn State looked the part, man.
Yeah, I'm going to reserve my judgment on Penn State for now because they beat, West Virginia by 23 last year too. So kind of same thing, and we'll obviously learn more about them as the weeks go on. A couple teams here, just touch on real quickly: Alabama, Ohio State, Texas. We're not going to talk a lot about 3 games that went a combined 167-6 in their final scores. Again, I did all 3 of those teams have the same thing in common with Georgia and Notre Dame, is that week 1 you're working some stuff out. A lot of penalties for all those teams. Again, you're able to overcome those. Those are the signs of really good teams. And especially these teams, I mean, playing, and I was going to touch on it too. I can touch on it now, but the freshman wide receivers that we were talking about all offseason long. J.J. Smith, Jeremiah Smith from Ohio State, 6 catches, 92 yards, 2 touchdowns. He already looks like the focal point for the Buckeyes. Ryan Wingo for Texas, 4 catches, 70 yards. Ryan Williams from the Crimson Tide, 2 catches, 139 yards, 2 touchdowns. So every time he's touched the ball so far in his college football career, he's taken it to the house.
60-something yards per reception is not bad.
Yeah, and if you add on Alabama's wide receivers, we talked about them. Not even Keandre Lambert-Smith. We're talking about Perry Thompson and Cam Coleman. Thompson with 2 catches for 82 yards and a touchdown. Cam Coleman, 2 catches for 62 yards and a touchdown. So these guys came in with a ton of hype, about as much as I can remember for a freshman wide receiver class in a long time. And I know it wasn't against great competition. We'll see them, against better competition down the road. But again, some of these dudes like Ryan Williams is 17 years old, and Cam Coleman's 17 years old. And they're out there playing with dudes who are 4 or 5 years older than them, and they're just studs.
Yeah, I mean, on these 3 teams, I don't know how much to say about Ohio State. They did what we thought they'd do. Texas, the defense against Colorado State, that's impressive. Posting up a 0 against the Colorado State offense, like you mentioned earlier, it's not a bad offense. Yeah. And same thing, Western Kentucky is one of those group of 5 teams that at the end of the year you're going to see Western Kentucky averaging 400-something yards a game. They'll be in the top whatever in the country of yardage and points scored per game. And Alabama's defense looked like Alabama's defense like we've seen all along. They did exactly what the Nick Saban teams do to teams like this. They looked the exact same way. The only they were explosive as could be on offense, and defensively they were flying around, causing turnovers. There's some new faces that we haven't seen in Alabama yet that looked really good on the defensive side of the ball. But again, it's Western Kentucky, but Bama still looked like Bama in my eyes. 1 game into the year.
Yep. One last thing, man. Let's talk about a game that feels like it was 4 weeks ago.
It really does.
It was Thursday night in Boulder, and it was Colorado against North Dakota State, where Cam Miller and the Bison went in there, and Cam Miller was unflappable the entire game, dude. He was honestly, I didn't know Cam Miller. Some of the North Dakota State quarterbacks like Carson Wentz and those guys, but he showed out. And again, everybody knows my feelings on Colorado. The offense is still amazing. It might even be better than it was last year.
Always better.
Defense is still a trash can.
Yep.
Just an absolute. Yep. It's terrible.
Yep.
And Deion can try to spin it any way he wants in the post game, and it would have been a bigger margin, obviously, if you didn't allow a touchdown at the end of the game. Also, you probably would have given North Dakota State a chance at Hail Mary if you knew what to do in time management. Took us all of 3 hours to criticize a coach for time management that we've all been doing on College Football 25 for the past 6 weeks when it came out. So it's, again, I just foresee more of the same issues, and I think it's going to start Saturday night at Nebraska.
Yeah, I don't disagree. The skill position players at Colorado, what we thought they were, Shedeur Sanders.
Dude, Jimmy Horn is fast.
Yeah, he is, man. I mean, again, they're receivers, and Shedeur Sanders does not have to take a back seat to anybody. And I mean,
he's going to be lucky if he stays alive for the season, dude. Like he was still getting pounded because their offensive line. And I know he holds on to the ball a little too long, and he makes plays, but there were a couple shots that he took, and he's not going to just be able to toss it up when pressure's in your face. He just tosses it up, and there's Jimmy Horn right down the middle of the field catching it. I mean, you're not going to be able to do that against actual Power 4 teams.
Yeah, and I'll be the first to say this. I am totally fine if anybody wants to hate on the fact that, like, Colorado getting all the publicity that they get, and they're probably going to end up being a 4 or 5 win football team. Because
that's why we're talking about them last on this podcast.
Right. And I'm totally fine with the people that want to say that, like you're talking about, the defense is trash. All of that is true. But the people that dog Shedeur Sanders and act like he's overrated or something I'm sorry, guys, you're dead wrong. This guy is beyond legit. He's going to be a good pro as well. He stands in the pocket and takes shellackings over and over and over again and just delivers strikes down the field while somebody is about to just annihilate him. And it's impressive. He makes throws on the run. He's as accurate as he can possibly be. And he's got great receivers. But like you said, offensive line it's better than what it was last year through one game. But it's still not where it needs to be. And the defense is awful. But we'll find out this week in a hostile environment, because that place, is going to be out of body at Lincoln on Saturday night. And we'll find out how good they are Saturday night.
I'll tell you what, though, dude, it's always fun to watch Travis Hunter play football. I think he's so good. He should, if he's going to focus on one position ever, it should be wide receiver.
Think about this, man. Really wrap your head around this. He's projected to be a top 5, guaranteed top 10 pick. And they don't even know what position he's going to play yet. He's going to be a top 10 pick as a corner and a top 10 pick as a wide receiver.
Yeah.
Unless I'm mistaken, we probably won't ever see this again. I don't know that we'll ever see this again. That you'll be a top 10 pick in the NFL at 2 positions.
I will give credit to Dion there. Like, he's the only coach who was had said, yeah, you can play both ways. And no, like, that's why he's following Dion. That's why he's with him.
Yeah.
He's the one who said, yeah, 100%, play 140 plays a game. I don't care. As long as you can do it, I don't care.
And he's elite at both. But I'm with you. I think he's probably going to be more of a receiver at the next level. But what do I know?
Yep. All right. That's our week 1 breakdown. It's coming at you on Tuesday. If you're lucky enough and if you're following us on YouTube, it might be released earlier. You never know. So you might get the chance to watch it before this Boston College Florida State game. So you got to be subscribed to the YouTube channel. You got to be subscribed to Apple. You got to be subscribed to Spotify. And week 1 overreaction was in full effect. Can't wait till week 2. We are going to be back in 2 days, Thursday morning, to break down some of the biggest matchups for week 2. So we appreciate you guys. As always, we will see you next time.